Today, March 13th, Kuwait International Airport is still closed, and power lines across the country are still being repaired after Iranian drones took them out yesterday. This is confirmed. Kuwait's own civil aviation authority stated it publicly. The airport was struck by multiple drones on March 12th, causing what officials described as material damage. Kuwait's Ministry of Electricity confirmed that drone debris knocked 6 overhead power transmission lines out of service, triggering partial blackouts across multiple districts. Read that again. 6 power lines disabled. And that damage came not from direct grid strikes, but from debris of drones that were successfully intercepted by Kuwait's own air defenses. The airspace over Kuwait has been completely sealed since February 28th. Flight Radar 24 confirms this morning that Kuwait's closure remains total, with no reopening timeline announced by authorities. And here's what makes this bigger than the drone count suggests. Kuwait was never supposed to be at the center of this conflict. Not at this scale, not this deep into the campaign. Qatar hosts the largest American military base in the Middle East. Bahrain hosts the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. The UAE carries the heaviest economic exposure in the region. Kuwait's threat profile was assessed as lower than its neighbors going into this war. That assessment has been completely dismantled over the past 2 weeks in ways no Gulf capital anticipated. Since February 28th, FDD's Long War Journal tracked 414 drone attacks and 226 missile strikes against Kuwait. And that number was recorded as of March 12th, before today's wave even began. 414 drones against one country in 13 days. That is not spillover. That is a sustained, methodical campaign with Kuwait as a deliberate and repeated target. Now let's understand why Kuwait ended up here. Because this did not happen by accident, and the targeting logic reveals something critical about how Iran is running this entire operation. Ali Al Salem Air Base sits roughly 50 kilometers northwest of Kuwait City, one of the primary U.S. Air Force staging and logistics hubs in the region, hosting thousands of American personnel. Camp Arifjan, also in Kuwait, serves as forward headquarters for U.S. Army Central Command, the ground coordination spine of American military operations across the entire Middle East. When Iran's IRGC announced on March 4th that it fired 230 drones at U.S. facilities across the region, Ali Al Salem and Camp Arifjan were both named explicitly on that announced target list. In my view, this is the fact Kuwait's government cannot say publicly, but every analyst watching this conflict understands. Kuwait did not choose this war and actively tried to avoid it. Before February 28th, Kuwait, like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, asked Washington not to use its territory as a launch platform for offensive operations against Iran. That request was bypassed. And under Iran's stated military doctrine, the moment American bombs fell on Iranian soil, every American military node in the Gulf became a declared legitimate target. Kuwait's civilian airport sits close enough to Ali Al Salem that striking it sends a direct signal to U.S. military planners without Iran having to formally declare it struck an American base. That gap, hitting civilian infrastructure adjacent to military targets, is precisely how Iran has maintained escalation control and avoided crossing specific thresholds throughout this campaign. Now look at the power outage story more carefully, because this dimension is being significantly underreported, and it reveals something important about modern air defense economics. Kuwait's electricity grid was not Iran's primary target. On March 12th, the blackouts were a secondary consequence of Kuwait's own air defense system doing exactly what it was built to do. Every intercepted drone produces a debris field. That debris lands somewhere. When it lands on a high-voltage transmission line, that line fails. And 6 of them failed in a single interception wave. In my view, this is one of the most underappreciated dynamics of this entire conflict. The cost of defense is not just financial, it is infrastructural. Successful interceptions generate their own damage. In a sustained high-volume drone campaign, the debris from air defense operations alone becomes a secondary pressure on civilian infrastructure that no defense doctrine was originally designed to absorb. The aviation picture this morning is complete. Kuwait Airways has suspended all operations. Jazeera Airways, the country's main budget carrier, has halted all flights until further notice. Emirates, Qatar Airways, Etihad, and Turkish Airlines have all canceled Kuwait services with no confirmed restart date, leaving the airport effectively removed from the regional flight network entirely. Cirium flight tracking data shows more than 1,300 flights to and from Middle Eastern destinations canceled since February 28th, with Kuwait at the center, as the only hub directly struck on its terminal. Kuwait is a transit point for routes connecting South Asia, East Africa, and Europe. Every sealed day pushes that traffic to Saudi Arabia, overwhelming airports in Riyadh and Jeddah beyond their designed capacity. If this layered analysis is why you come to this channel, drop a comment right now telling me which Gulf country you think is most exposed as this conflict continues to expand past every original map. And if this video gave you the context the headlines buried today, hit like right now It is the fastest way to get this reporting in front of more people who need to understand what is actually happening. Because next, we break down Iran's drone campaign from a systems perspective, the platforms used, and why interception is harder than the coverage admits. What 414 strikes against one country in 13 days actually signals about where this conflict is heading is something the live news cycle is not connecting yet. Stay with me, because the numbers in the next section reframe this entire conflict in ways most live coverage is not connecting yet. Here's the number nobody in mainstream coverage is putting front and center right now. Iran spends roughly $20,000 per drone. Gulf states spend up to $4 million per interceptor missile to shoot it down. That ratio, one side firing a $20,000 weapon, the other responding with something that costs 200 times more, is the real story of what is happening in Kuwaiti airspace right now. The Shahed 136 is the primary weapon behind Kuwait's airport strike and the 6 downed power lines, and it is quietly breaking the financial logic of Gulf air defense at scale. Let's understand what this drone actually is, because the technical details matter more than the headline numbers. The Shahed 136 is a one-way attack drone. It flies to the target and detonates on impact, no return. It measures 3.5 meters long with a 2.5 meter wingspan and carries a warhead of 50 to 90 kilograms depending on the variant. Its range reaches up to 2,000 kilometers from inside Iranian territory. It flies at 185 kilometers per hour using GPS and inertial navigation. That is far slower than any fighter jet. In theory, it should be simple to intercept. In practice, theory runs into a problem called volume. Iran does not fire one drone at a time. It fires them in coordinated waves, dozens simultaneously, approaching from multiple directions, forcing air defense systems to track and engage multiple threats at once. When a Patriot battery is managing 15 incoming threats from different vectors simultaneously, every intercept decision carries a financial cost that compounds with each wave that follows. The UAE gave the clearest public window into Iran's drone inventory on March 3rd. Officials displayed recovered wreckage and confirmed 3 specific variants in use: the Shahed 136, Shahed 107, and Shahed 238. The Shahed 238 is the upgraded version. It replaces the piston engine with a jet engine, pushing speed significantly higher and reducing the acoustic signature defenders rely on for early warning. The Shahed 101 electric variant appeared next. Identified by analysts on March 11th, it uses an electric motor, almost completely silent on final approach. It was specifically engineered to remove the one auditory warning signal that ground crews and sensors had been relying on to detect incoming drones in time. Iran did not stumble into these upgrades. It watched 3 years of Ukraine learning to counter the Shahed in combat and then re-engineered around every detection method that worked. In my view, that learning loop is what separates this campaign from all previous Iranian drone operations. Iran is not deploying a static inventory. It is actively updating its systems based on what Gulf defenders are doing. A live feedback cycle that most air defense doctrine was not designed to face. Now look at the cost math from the defender's side, because this is where a tactical problem becomes a structural one for every Gulf government involved in this conflict. U.S. Department of Defense budget documents confirm Patriot PAC-3 interceptors cost between $3 million and $13.5 million per shot. Gulf states are currently firing the PAC-3, the most capable and most expensive variant in the Patriot family. It is also the one being consumed fastest. Iran's Shahed 136 costs $20,000 to $50,000 per unit. In the worst-case ratio, the defender is spending 675 times more than the attacker to stop a single incoming drone. Atlantic Council analyst Jose Pelayo said publicly that Gulf states risk depleting interceptor stockpiles unless they become more selective about when to fire. The depletion is not imminent, he confirmed, but it is already shaping the tactical decisions being made in real time by air defense crews across the Gulf. This is why the U.S. made a move that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Washington formally asked Ukraine for anti-drone expertise. Ukraine, a country still fighting its own war, developed $2,500 interceptor drones specifically to counter the Shahed. The Gulf is now buying that knowledge. Zelensky confirmed on March 10th that 11 countries, including the U.S. and multiple Gulf states, had requested Ukrainian drone interception assistance. Some requests had already resulted in concrete deliveries. In my view, the world's most powerful military asking Ukraine for help countering a $20,000 drone is one of the most quietly significant admissions of capability gap in this entire conflict. And here's the detail Foreign Affairs called the great irony of this war. America's newest combat drone, the Lucas, is a reverse-engineered copy of Iran's Shahed 136. It was built from captured wreckage by a company in Arizona and deployed to the Middle East in December 2025, months before this conflict began. U.S. Central Command confirmed Lucas drones were used against Iran on February 28th. the very opening day of this conflict in the Gulf. The weapon Iran invented, gave to Russia, Russia used against Ukraine, the US captured, studied, and copied, is now being fired at the country that built the original. That full circle is not just ironic. It shows precisely how fast proven drone technology spreads once battlefield tested at scale. And it explains why sanctions and export controls have limits that this conflict has now made visible to every military planner and defense ministry watching. Because next, we are going to look at what all of this means for the Strait of Hormuz and global oil markets, including the insurance crisis already underway and the economic pressure now building well beyond the Gulf. Stay with me, because the oil numbers in the next section are already moving in ways that will affect economies that have nothing to do with this conflict. The International Energy Agency used 4 words on March 12th that have never appeared in the organization's history. Largest supply disruption. Not largest in years. Not largest since 1973. Largest ever. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide at its narrowest, carrying roughly 20% of the world's traded oil, has effectively stopped moving. Traffic is down 90% right now. Hundreds of ships are anchored and waiting on both sides of that waterway. They are not waiting for weather. They are waiting to find out if the path ahead is mined. Iran's new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei issued his first public statement on March 12th. He did not appear on camera. His message was 4 words. Hormuz must stay closed. That is not a threat issued in the heat of the moment. That is declared policy from the person who now controls that decision. Stated yesterday, while oil traded above $100 a barrel. Let's put the 90% traffic drop into physical terms, because the number alone does not capture what is actually happening to the global supply chain right now. 20 million barrels of oil per day normally move through the strait. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, all of their exports use this single 21-mile corridor. There is no replacement at that scale. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline and the UAE's Fujairah bypass combined carry roughly 2.6 million barrels per day at full capacity. That is 13% of normal strait volume. The other 87% has nowhere to go, and Iran is targeting the bypass routes too. Drones struck fuel storage at Oman's port of Duqm. Drones struck Salalah. London's Joint War Committee has placed Omani waters on its high-risk maritime list. The IEA announced Wednesday that 32 member countries would release 400 million barrels from strategic reserves. That is a significant coordinated response, but it covers roughly 20 days of normal strait throughput. It is a bridge, not a solution. And the bridge only holds if the strait reopens within those 20 days. As of this morning, there's no timeline for that happening. Now look at the insurance layer, because this is where the disruption becomes self-reinforcing regardless of what military decisions get made in the next 72 hours. On March 5th, protection and indemnity insurance was suspended for vessels transiting the strait. Without P&I coverage, no commercial operator can legally or financially send a ship through under standard terms. The Joint War Committee of the London market has designated the entire strait and surrounding waters as a war risk zone. That designation alone halts most traffic without Iran firing another weapon. War risk premiums before February 28th sat at 0.125% per transit. By the eve of the conflict, they had risen to between 0.2 and 0.4%, already a $250,000 jump per large crude carrier trip. Those premiums are now irrelevant because coverage itself is suspended. No underwriter is issuing policies for straight transits at any price right now. Trump told oil company CEOs this week to send their tankers through and show some guts. His energy secretary posted that the Navy had escorted a tanker through. That post was deleted within hours. The White House confirmed it was wrong. No escort had taken place, but the false statement had already moved oil markets before it was retracted. As of this morning, the U.S. Navy has not escorted a single commercial tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. Treasury Secretary Bessent told Sky News escorts would happen as soon as militarily possible. The reason is straightforward. The strait is just 21 miles wide, and Iran's coastline looks directly down on every shipping lane inside it. U.S. forces are still working to suppress Iran's drone and missile capacity before Washington can safely put tankers back into that corridor. On March 10th, U.S. intelligence confirmed Iran had begun planting naval mines in the strait. The U.S. military destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels. But the mines already placed must be found and cleared before any escort operation becomes viable at the scale markets are waiting for. In my view, the mine dimension is the detail this crisis has not fully priced yet. Mines do not require a command. They do not need to be fired. They simply wait. Clearing a live minefield in a 21-mile corridor under active drone and missile threat is one of the most complex naval operations the U.S. has faced in decades. Insurance expert Marcus Baker of Marsh told NBC News this week that only one thing can actually restart trade through the strait: an end to the fighting. Until that happens, the ships wait and supplies fall. The IEA called this the largest supply disruption in history. Iran's new leadership has declared the closure a tool of pressure that must continue. And as of March 13th, no path-through has opened. Because next, we look at what this means for the American economy. Inflation already moving, gas prices up 61 cents in a month, and the corner the Federal Reserve now finds itself in. The Federal Reserve meets in 4 days, and right now it faces a problem that has no clean answer in any economics textbook ever written. Gas prices in the United States have risen roughly 60 cents per gallon since February 28th. The national average hit $3.58 by March 11th, up from about $3 before the war, according to AORA data. Moody's chief economist Mark Zandi told CNBC this week that if oil holds near $100, gas will close in on $4 per gallon within days, before the straight closure has even registered in the March inflation data. The February CPI was released March 11th, 2.4% annually, but that number covers the period before February 28th. It does not include a single day of this war. The March print will be the first real picture. EY Parthenon estimates monthly inflation could hit 1% in March alone. For context, 1% in a single month would be the largest monthly spike in 4 years, driven entirely by energy prices, not by wages, not by housing, not by anything the Federal Reserve can directly suppress by adjusting interest rates. That distinction matters enormously for what happens on March 18th. Before the war, the U.S. economy was already showing strain. February saw 92,000 jobs lost and unemployment ticked to 4.4%. GDP growth for late 2025 had been revised down to 1.4%. That was the baseline. Now add $100 oil, a 60-cent gas shock, and a closed Strait of Hormuz, and two incompatible problems arrive on the Fed's desk simultaneously. Normally, when jobs fall and growth slows, the Fed cuts rates to stimulate borrowing. But cutting now, with inflation surging above 3%, risks making that problem materially worse. And raising rates to fight inflation while the economy sheds jobs risks pushing a slowdown into something much harder to reverse. Both moves are dangerous. Both forms of inaction are also dangerous. This is stagflation. Rising prices and slowing growth requiring opposite responses simultaneously. The last time the U.S. faced this seriously, in the 1970s, resolving it required a deliberately painful recession. Severin Borenstein, faculty director of the Energy Institute at UC Berkeley, told Al Jazeera this week that high inflation combined with high unemployment is simply just really tough for the Fed to deal with. Chicago Fed. President Austin Goolsbee told Bloomberg that as uncertainty grows, the moment it makes sense to act keeps getting pushed back. Markets now price the next cut in July or September at the earliest. JP Morgan estimates U.S. inflation could rise from 2.4 to 3% or higher if oil stays elevated. Goldman Sachs holds the same view, contingent on disruptions being temporary. There's no signal they are. The political dimension compounds all of this. Congressional Republicans face midterms later this year. Affordability has been their central domestic message for months. A 60-cent gas shock on top of 5 years of elevated prices hits that message directly, regardless of how the decision to go to war is ultimately framed. Trump told Fox News the oil price surge is a small price to pay for defeating Iran. That may hold strategically, but $4 gasoline is not abstract for 70 million households, spending about $2,500 a year at the pump. Sam Ori at the University of Chicago told Al Jazeera that historically, when oil reaches 4 to 5% of GDP and stays there, a recession has always followed. The U.S. is not at that level today, but the direction is clear, and Ori noted an indefinite Hormuz closure would reach that threshold fast. In my view, the key sentence this week came from Reagan Capital's Skylar Wynand, quoted by NBC News. Until Hormuz opens and the turmoil subsides, the Federal Reserve may step away from any action on interest rates. That single sentence explains the full transmission chain. A 21-mile waterway, 7,000 miles from Washington, is holding U.S. borrowing costs in place for every American with a mortgage, a car loan, or a credit card. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate rose from 5.99% at end of February to 6.14% by March 10th. That is the Strait of Hormuz transmitting directly into American housing markets in under 2 weeks. So here's where things stand on March 13th. Kuwait's airport struck by drones. Hormuz closed for 13 consecutive days. The IEA has declared the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global market. Iran's new supreme leader has called the closure a deliberate tool of war, not a temporary phase. The Federal Reserve meets in 4 days with no standard playbook for this combination of conditions. The March CPI prints in early April. Gas prices and mortgage rates are moving right now. The disruption is live, and the strait is still closed. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe and hit the bell. This story is still developing, and the next number that drops could move markets the same hour it is released.